Let's jump right into this explainer and explore how the illusion of peace in 1938 rapidly degenerated into a global conflict. We're going to look really closely at a very specific, incredibly tense window of history. We're talking about the 11-month countdown to the deadliest conflict the world has ever seen. And, the sequence of events here is just absolutely fascinating.
Think about the dramatic irony of the famous phrase, peace in our time. It's September 29, 1938, and British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returns home, waving a piece of paper and proudly declaring he has secured exactly that, peace in our time. Both he and French Premier Édouard Daladier sincerely believed they had just successfully negotiated a permanent end to German expansionism by simply yielding to Adolf Hitler's demands. But, well, history tells us a much different story, doesn't it? So how did the promise of peace unravel into a full-blown world war in exactly 11 months? We're going to start the ticking clock right here to see exactly how diplomacy failed. By looking at the agreements, the betrayals, and the frantic scrambles for power between October 1938 and September 1939, we can trace the exact steps that dragged the whole world into the abyss. Section 1. The Munich Illusion. Let's see how this all builds from the fateful date of September 29, 1938. To really wrap our heads around this period, we have to grasp the core concept of appeasement. Essentially, it's the humiliating policy of yielding to the demands of a dictator. Chamberlain and Daladier were totally convinced they had halted German expansionism, but the reality was far darker. They essentially forced Czechoslovakia, a sovereign nation mind you, to yield the German-speaking Sudetenland to Germany. And they did this without Czechoslovakia even having a real voice at the table, all under the incredibly naive assumption that this would be Hitler's final territorial demand. The sheer cost of that appeasement was absolutely devastating. Deserted by its allies, Czechoslovakia ceded nearly 11,500 square miles of territory to Germany. That land contained 3.5 million inhabitants. And the tragedy didn't stop there. The Munich Pact basically opened the floodgates. By November 20th, a second partition forced the hapless Czechs to surrender even more land, this time to Poland and Hungary. Following those partitions to Poland and Hungary, Czechoslovakia lost a massive chunk of its mineral resources and crucial industrial installations. Consequently, their so-called independence became a mere facade. They were entirely stripped of the natural and industrial defenses that made them a viable, secure nation in Central Europe. They were completely exposed. Moving on to Section 2, the Men of Munich. To really understand this pact, we've got to look at the 4 specific leaders who orchestrated the whole thing. You'll notice a really stark contrast between the Western leaders, who were struggling with economic depression, and the fascist dictators, who were just hungry for territorial living space. On one side, we have Daladier of France and Chamberlain of Great Britain. Both represented nations absolutely battered by the economic depression, which had forced drastic reductions in their defense spending. They simply weren't militarily prepared for a conflict, and that drove their desperate policy of appeasement. On the flip side, you have Mussolini and Hitler. Mussolini was feeling increasingly jealous of Hitler's growing power and wanted his own living space. And Hitler? Well, he used nationalism and brilliant, brutal propaganda to crush opposition at home, seeking endless expansion. For Hitler, Munich just proved that the European powers would supinely accept pretty much whatever he demanded. Section 3. The mask slips. Let's fast forward a bit to March 1939, which is when the policy of appeasement officially dies. German troops just crossed the frontier to proclaim the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, proving once and for all that the Munich promises were totally empty. As of March 15, 1939, the Czechoslovak Republic simply ceases to exist. This completely shattered the illusion of peace. Just days after Chamberlain accused Hitler of breaking his pledge, Hitler essentially swallowed up the entire rest of the defunct Czechoslovak state. And less than a week later, on March 21st, Germany pivoted its aggressive focus right over to Poland, presenting these incredibly harsh, totally unacceptable demands. Hitler wanted the restoration of the free city of Danzig to Germany and an agreement to construct an extraterritorial railway and road straight across the Polish corridor to connect Germany with East Prussia. Poland flatly refused. They made it absolutely clear that any attempt to change Danzig's status without their agreement would mean war. Section 4. The Web of Alliances. Moving into the spring of 1939, absolute panic triggered a frantic scramble for allies. It's wild to see how rapidly the major powers began throwing around military guarantees and forming pacts during this time. In late March, Britain and France guarantee Poland's independence. Then, in April, Mussolini's Italian troops occupy Albania to counterbalance Germany, which immediately prompts Britain and France to guarantee Greece and Romania. By April 26th, Chamberlain is so alarmed, he actually announces conscription for the British armed forces. And then, on May 22nd, Italy and Germany formalize their identity of interests by signing the Pact of Steel. The board is literally being set for a massive global confrontation. Hitler's true intentions were confirmed the very next day, in a genuinely terrifying address to his generals. He told them, quote, "Gentlemen, do not expect a repetition of the affair of Czechoslovakia. This time you shall have a war." He made it crystal clear that he was actively seeking an immediate military conflict. He didn't want another diplomatic concession like he got at Munich. He wanted a war, and the so-called Polish question was going to be his excuse. Then, on August 23rd, a shocking reversal left Britain and France totally outmaneuvered by Berlin. For months, the Western powers had tried and failed to recruit the USSR into an alliance, just completely bogged down by mutual distrust. But Germany swooped right in and secured a non-aggression pact with Moscow in a matter of weeks. And how did they do it? Well, Berlin offered the Soviets something Britain and France never would, a secret protocol to partition Poland right down the middle, handing Moscow a massive sphere of influence on a silver platter. Which brings us to Section 5, 0 Hour. Let's look at the final, breathless days of August 1939. On August 25th, Great Britain transformed its earlier unilateral guarantee into a formal, binding alliance with Poland. Now, this is absolutely crucial, because this formal alliance actually caused Hitler to briefly cancel a 3 p.m. invasion order. When he heard about the signing of the treaty, he paused. But let's be clear, this wasn't a change of heart. It was just a slight delay so he could recalibrate his forces. Meanwhile, the German propaganda machine was working overtime, busy spreading totally false rumors to justify their impending attack. Orchestrated with consummate mastery by Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, German newspapers and radio literally invented complete massacres out of thin air. They broadcasted fabricated stories claiming dozens of Germans had been brutally murdered in Polish towns, basically whipping the German public into a frenzy of manufactured outrage. The whole diplomatic theater finally reached its last act. After a completely futile, minutes-long meeting with the Polish ambassador, Hitler officially set 0 hour for the next morning. The Germans announced that their quote-unquote generous offer had been rejected by the Poles. But the terrifying truth is that hours before that meeting even took place, at exactly 12:40 p.m., the Führer had already signed the order for the assault. Yet Hitler still wanted a specific excuse to show the world. So, to create a fake justification for war, the German SS orchestrated this highly specific false flag operation at 8 p.m. It's known as the Gleiwitz operation. First, security men dressed up in Polish uniforms, which were actually supplied by the head of the German Secret Service. Second, they simulated an attack on the German radio station at Gleiwitz, briefly occupying the building. And third, they broadcast a rambling, threatening anti-German message over the microphone in Polish. It was the final, desperate deception before 0 hour struck at 4:45 a.m. the very next day. Looking back at those devastating 11 months from Munich all the way to Gleiwitz, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought about the true cost of appeasement. When facing unchecked aggression, does yielding to demands ever actually preserve peace, or does it merely postpone the inevitable? It's a question that continues to echo through history. Thanks for joining me to unpack this crucial timeline in this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep analyzing the facts.